Today's session, we're going to record it. I'll share it afterward. It's going to be very conversational, as you see, as soon as Amanda and Mike get going here, and I turn it over to them. So please jump in as we go. I'm eager to get Amanda and Mike going. Mike is senior editor of the AJC, leading the Black culture team, served as writer, editor, leader for varied publications, Wall Street Journal, The Guardian, Rolling Stone, others. And Amanda is just all sorts of genius over at UGA, journalism leader at zeroes in on community journalism, the context of products and emerging digital tools, which is the big theme for today. So I'll keep clicking people in as they join us. And with that, Amanda, Mike, thank you so much for your patience and helping me out with this, and take it away.
Sure. Thanks, Todd. So I know that we are coming to this this title, the workshop with lots of different levels of understanding. So I'm going to spend just these first few minutes kind of talking through the big things that I see happening. And then we're going to break down, and Mike and I can talk to you guys about individual questions and thoughts and what he has learned in building news brands. You know, when we talk about SEO, which is the first part of this, it really is the search engine optimization part of our lives is all about showing up first on Google, right? So if you've got no background in SEO at all, search engine optimization is how high your result pops up when people are searching for content in a search engine. So I type in Oglethorpe County News. That's the county of one of the news organizations that I run here out of the University of Georgia. And we are the first and second hit. The third hit, of course, is a Facebook group that is a little bit problematic, that tells all kinds of funny things about the community. We do get the fourth hit for our Facebook page, and then Fox 5 Atlanta starts showing up. The idea is that nobody goes to page 2 in Google. You really only go if you're desperate, right? So you want to show up within the first 6, if at all possible, when you are doing search engine work. And I think that is kind of one big takeaway for where news is right now. We know a lot of people, and actually statistically more people, are using search than ever before to get to news and information. And so because trust in social media is destabilizing, which is probably good. So search engine optimization is a set of really easy tools and concepts to try to get you up to page 1. The biggest things that I'll tell you is that it's actually not rocket science at all. I feel like when I teach my students about search engine optimization, they think it's like a unicorn in the forest. It's very mystical. But it really is just about using headlines, keywords, or tags, depending on your content management system, linking internally and externally to more content, making sure your images have really good captions and credits. That can be a huge help to search or SEO. In order to make sure that there's enough language around the content that you have in the digital space that will cue all of these crawlers, then the search engines, to pick up your piece first. So it's kind of like all these tiny little pieces of a puzzle working in concert, right? You got to make sure that the headline is specific. It's got local keywords and ideas that are going to be picked up by Google if someone is looking for a story on that. Same with the tags, the images, all of that. I'm going to show you some tools that kind of make this easier here in a second, but that's the basic concept. And good search engine optimization used to be a little bit more straightforward. Search engines change their algorithms all the time, and things are being emphasized and de-emphasized on social media platforms and in things like Google all the time. And so I will tell you that you know, the mystical unicorn in the forest is actually not that bad of a metaphor for what SEO can feel like sometimes. Like I'm just throwing a bunch of things out there, hoping that it scrapes or catches the words so that people see my content first and not that Facebook group. So that is something that we want to kind of like acknowledge up front. And, you know, Mike and I have talked about this before too. Like, it's just hard. It's hard to know how to get your stuff in front of people. And if there's one big theme for everything we're going to talk about today, it's about connecting your content to your community. And that's what SEO is trying to do, is say, hey, I've got stuff here and it's good. It's good journalism. It's not just random stuff people posted online, and how to get that to happen. So SEO is one way. Inside of that, if you haven't played around with some of these basic kind of ways to think about how to use that language. So heads, keywords, tags, links. Your first stop is really Google Trends. So Google is still the primary search engine for most human beings. Bing never really has taken off. And so if you go to Google Trends kind of on a regular basis, we do it at our 9 a.m. news meeting every day for both my news organizations. And we kind of see what's the language that's trending right now. Sometimes it has absolutely nothing to do with what we're reporting on, particularly in community news. Or sometimes we can use these words that are already trending and popping up in Google and kind of piggyback onto them. So if I'm doing stories that somehow have something to do with analytics or data or a winter storm, that'd be unusual down here. I can use that language in order to try to help piggyback onto that traffic that's already happening in other places. So one of the first things we always look for is kind of these general trends. The other thing that I use Google Trends for a lot when it comes to SEO optimization is trying to figure out what language is preferable in the search engine. So of course, I'm contractually obligated to say go dogs at some point during this this workshop. So I looked at the terminology around the Georgia Bulldogs that I could use, say, in a story about them in order to get more traffic. And what I'm seeing here is that the purple using Georgia football is outperforming, say, just the word dogs, right? Or something like that. And so if I'm going to try to get the Georgia football traffic to my site, to my stories, to my content, I'm going to kind of play with this and figure out what's the language that most people are typing into the search engine or clicking on or using in order to try to, again, piggyback on the prevailing wisdom of society. So those are two kind of quick ways that I always think through and use Google in order to pick the keywords that I then tag my photos with, write my headline with, put in my keywords in order to try to help pull that SEO traffic to my content. A couple other quick things. Google Analytics is another place that I tend to go. So this is just giving me a sense of where information is coming from, how user activity is happening over time, when people are actually on my site and the pages that they are looking at. This is always, again, part of our 9 a.m. news meeting. You know, like, how does this change what we do, how we tag it in order to get better search engine optimization? And using analytics to kind of see where people's attention is inside of your digital space. It doesn't mean you have to cover those things. Like, we believe in big J journalism that does the right thing, even if it's not popular, right? But at the same time, if you can find a beautiful intersection between what people are already searching for and what's happening on your site, you can follow, you can double down, you can explore in order to help drive the traffic to the good content that you're doing. The other quick tool that I really like right now is called Google Search Console Insights. And everyone has this, it's free, it's just part of your Google account. But what it does is minute by minute, it tells you what content that you have that it's growing, what content that you have is most popular, and then how people are specifically finding you. So these are the words that they're typing into Google in order to land on your site. This has been super valuable for us from an SEO perspective. Obviously, people are very concerned about our slutty vegan restaurant right now because there's lots of rumors that it's going to close and it's not doing well. So you see this reflected, which tells us we should probably do a follow to see where they're at. But you can see even on the most popular content, these are the things people are typing in. These are the words that are taking them to our site. And so what does that tell us about how we need to be tagging our stories, how we need to be covering content, and those types of things? So one of the things that I try to do as much as possible is kind of skirt through that first thing every morning and kind of look at what my audience is doing, what their behavior looks like, what kind of language we have, so that we know how to optimize our language for SEO. The level 2 of this is to use a program to do it for you, which is actually pretty sweet. So the Yoast is probably my favorite right now. It's a little add-on inside of your CMS. So this is actually inside of Grady News Source. And this is a story about how much it costs to make a phone call from prison in Georgia, which, by the way, is pretty expensive. Down here, you will see that there's kind of a little smiley face driven tool about what your story will look like in Google. And then it will give you very specific ways to improve it. So it's saying you need more internal links. You should add a key phrase, which are keywords that are going to help people find your story. Your title is a little bit too long, and so it's going to run off the page on Google, or it's going to end in 3 dots, and people don't like that quite as well. But it's saying I am doing good with images and the text length, right? So readability. This is a really great way to kind of work through your story and say, okay, I could improve these elements of passive voice, or I could maybe improve sentence length. And that's going to ultimately improve my SEO and my readability with this specific article. They also have a new setting for inclusive language, which I think is pretty neat. And this is, again, a free plugin that you can put. It's in WordPress, but in other CMSs as well, that just gives you a little helping hand into doing some of the things that search engines then will click onto more and raise your content higher in the search results. The one thing that I want to show you, though, quickly is the crazy thing about where we are right now. So all of this is conventional SEO wisdom. Perhaps you even know it already. You know, that we use language, we watch language, we see the behavior of our audience, and we try to grab onto that traffic the best we can. AI has changed a lot of things, and we are in the process of, over the next, I want to say 6 months or so, going to see a fairly dramatic shift. And here's why. That original search that I did for you all, the Oglethorpe Echo, where we ended up first, that's great. Google now has an experimental generative AI search. You can get this, it's called through Google Labs. You can sign up for it to start playing with it and see how it works. I've been doing it for about a couple months now. And what it does is it uses AI to scan the vastness of the internet in order to answer the question that you are putting up here without ever having to click on any links. So we can ask it all kinds of follow-up questions about Oglethorpe County, and the AI just does the work, and it generates the information for you. As you can probably divine, this is not necessarily fantastic for news organizations that are looking for clicks or looking for people to go physically to their site, because it's all being done for you. It's kind of like Wikipedia on demand, but even more succinct. So when I, for instance, put in what's the news today in Central Georgia, it told me the news today in Central Georgia. I did not have to go to WMAZ or the Macon Telegraph or any other place. It just pulled from those and put the information in front of me, and I never have to click on anything. Obviously, we have trust issues. We don't know where the information is coming from. We have delegitimization of actual physical news sources, and this is not driving traffic to our website. So generative AI inside of search is going to kind of upend the SEO game. And we want you to not be scared. We want you to be aware, right? So there are trains moving on tracks that we can't derail. But what I think is important is to get a sense of, okay, if this is where this is going, how do I participate in this and still drive traffic and make that connection between community and content for us to our audiences? So if you've never seen this before, my colleagues are terrified by this. So hopefully you're not terrified, but aware. And I will tell you before we take some questions and I pass it off to Mike, one kind of encouraging integration that I'm seeing so far. I think right now AI is there's more like negative applications than positive, but the positive ones are coming and they're being more well developed all the time. One thing that I really like is an app that was actually developed for Slack from a good friend of mine who works at Newsday. His name is Ryan Restivo. And his Slack-based app, it's called SEO, and I'll show you how it works in a minute, allows you to use AI, ChatGPT specifically, in order to generate keywords based on Google Trends and really try to drive traffic using the good parts of AI to get people there. So this is a story we published on Grady News Source about a successful lobbying campaign for Madison County that they were really worried about pollution. So I copied and pasted the story into this Slack app. For those of you that use Slack, this probably looks really familiar. And it integrated it with Google Trends to say, here are the queries that are having to do with Georgia that are trending right now. Here are some tech or some language that's trending and rising. Here are the key terms in your story. And then based on that, here are the keywords in the last 6 hours that have performed the best from your story. And then from that, it generates AI and Google Trends driven headline options that would perform exceptionally well inside of a search engine. It also generates description ideas if you want to do like a social post or a little meta description of your content. And it will also write subheads. And if you read some of these, they're actually not too bad, right? And these are completely AI generated. Some of them are a little bit off if you read the story and you have to kind of, pick and choose. Sometimes we Frankenstein them and kind of hybrid them together. But this is a free Slack plugin or app that allows you inside of Slack itself to pull on both the power of AI and the power of Google Trends to make very specific SEO decisions. And I think this is kind of where we're going, right? So that we can use both of these tools in order to try to connect people with our content. So those were the big things that I wanted to kind of show you just off the cuff. This is like the big narrative arc that I'm tracking right now. What questions, thoughts, or concerns do y'all have?
Debbie,
I had a question, Amanda. I was writing down on the Yes SEO, the Slack that you were just showing. Is that a plugin, and what again did you copy and paste into it? So you're actually
Great.
doing that in Slack?
Yeah, you're doing it completely in Slack.
Okay.
We freaking love this tool at both the news organizations I run out of UGA. So it's actually you can see it down here. It's under apps. So you can actually go to apps in your Slack workspace and click add. It'll take you to an external site where it gives you options, and it's called YesEO. And once it's in there, you just click on it and you get inside of it within the Slack workspace. There's lots of things that you can do. And I think, yeah, it talks about the different ways that you can use it. You can use it specifically to analyze for Google Trends and keywords. I used Prep, which is I copied and pasted the entire story that my students had written into it, and then it gives me all of this data out of it. And Ryan is constantly working on upgrades and beta testing and trying new things. So it really is a way to teach and experiment with that integration. But there's lots of things, obviously, you can see inside of that you can do.
Debbie, how'd that work for you? I'm following up on Debbie. How'd you enter the story in there? The story
Sure.
you wanted to get filtered through YesEO.
Yep, I can show you. So it's just a set of commands, and it tells you on the home page, what you want to do for the commands, but you put in prep and then you just paste in the story. Obviously, I didn't have the story there, but you paste the story in the box. And then it spits out all the things that I just showed you.
Wow. Impressive. Any other questions for Amanda before we jump over to Mike? Awesome. Please just keep using the chat and the informal. Deb, thanks for raising your hand there as well. And with that, Mike, go ahead and take over, pal.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being with us today. Really excited about discussing this. And I wanted to sort of take what Amanda was saying and give not an opposite view, but a view that sort of looks at, what I like to call the art versus science conversation about SEO. And as someone who has not only written for several publications, local, regional, national, international, and also served as editor in some of these places. I came in to really my career as a journalist really started to take off more than before in around 2008, when I was hired as the founding Atlanta editor for Thrillist. And Thrillist was at the time a men's publication with their demographic and who they aimed for were single men, aiming to be around 25, post-college to about 45 years old as their target. They were expecting that those gentlemen to be making about $45,000 per year. And the goal and what our aim as a brand was to give college educated young single men who live in one of the major cities the best actionable new thing to do in the city where they've not heard it from anyone else. So we had to be first two stories. These had to be actionable stories. They were skewed towards men, of course. If you look at Thrillers now, there's no indication whatsoever, unless you go way back in the catalog, this was a men's publication, because it was good, actionable information, and it used to be first, and it was hyper local. It was very focused on that city. So you would get Monday through Friday an email. They did not use the term newsletters; they used email. And I'm going into this history that I have with Thrillist and what it taught me about a lot of these things. And again, that was 2008, when a lot of my peers and friends in journalism were in print and the industry was being shaken up. And I got into this digital and email oriented thing. But the reason I bring that up in this conversation is Thrillist did not get an SEO person until the year after I left full-time, which was my last day full-time was 2012. So I was there for 4 years full-time, came back a year and a half later on contract to still manage Atlanta, but there was no SEO. So we grew the newsletter from zero launch to over 100,000 followers for the Atlanta Bureau in 4 years. And how did we do that? Again, zeroing in on who you're speaking to, making sure that you are serving that audience very well, finding some type of niche to say, okay, we want to have actionable information. So it's not about me and showing you all the cool things I did, which, as we know, is a lot of the influencer model today. But no, what can you go and do? How can you experience these things in your city? So we provided you with very well filtered and sifted information, condense that down to 350 words, add some humor into these stories, and make sure that you knew enough to decide for yourself, is this something I want to go and do today? Could that be a restaurant? Could that be a clothier who makes clothing here in Atlanta or sells clothing? Is that an event? Is that a bar? Is that a new app that was developed by someone in the city? Actionable things. So I come from the digital media side that sees SEO as something that is a very helpful tool, but identifying and sticking to and uplifting your brand voice and identity are critical to the mixture of the art and science of incorporating SEO. You don't want to SEO yourself into obscurity, in other words. As we're all learning here, and we are, having the conversations and all of these great things. I mean, I wasn't familiar with SEO. So again, don't get me wrong. I will be incorporating these tools as well, but therein lies the problem. We are all using these tools. So in order for you to stand out and have some way of differentiating yourself, you're going to have to remember that who you are and your relationship and your ways of engaging with your audience is critical to your brand as a media organization, as a journalist, as an editor. So I say that to say, there are clearly ways. I mean, SEMrush, absolutely Google Trends. Google Trends is, of course, a favorite because it's free. You can just go there. It's going to give you information, and it at least level set you for where you would like to go moving forward. But as you're looking at these tools, one of the ways that I saw this impacting me and later on in my career at the Wall Street Journal specifically was I wrote for 4 years about culture. And the thing about culture is that it can be very, very hard to quantify. especially when it is emerging culture. And as news organizations, you don't want to be 3 or 4 years late to something that has developed and is already a cultural phenomenon. You want to identify that on the cusp. You want to catch it while it's still fresh and new so that it is news. So in those cases, the Wall Street Journal is unlike other publications that it considers itself competitors with, such as the New York Times, whereas while everyone expects those major publications to be, credible, to have great insights, to have great information, to have great voices, the Wall Street Journal needs data and numbers for anything that goes into the newspaper. So it sounds great. It sounds like a good story. It may not be a good story for us, Wall Street Journal, because we need to be able to see some research and some data and some numbers. Wall Street automatically tells you they're looking at financials. They're looking at reports. They're looking at, can we prove this with math? So if you're doing that with culture, it can be pretty hard. So SEO can be a great tool, but it's also one where you're going to run into some walls. And so there's a lot of this that is just gut. And so the usage of your gut feeling and speaking to people, the real world SEO, I like to call it, and just having those conversations, matching and pairing that with those tools in your basic Google Trends, your Yoast, all of these things, that's where you're really going to find your identity. And I want to go into that and the whole idea of balancing it as the media field. We're in a moment today where everyone is either a journalist or a content creator. And so again, when you're dealing with the fact that breaking news and getting to a story first has become all the more difficult because everyone not only is going to Twitter, and as much of, the challenges that X has today with, many things that people are saying, well, what's going on here? And is it still the force that it is? Well, Twitter is still significant, very much if you're in the news. But the problem that you're going to have is everyone else is looking at that same information. And then everyone else can go to a site like Canva and create templates and make breaking news. I'm always surprised and somewhat, humored by the fact that I know so many breaking news journalists now that I had no idea were in the field. I mean, everyone is breaking news just because you can get a template and you can say things. And of course, what it's missing is the rigor that happens in actual journalism. It's missing whether or not there's any factual basis here. It's missing whether or not anyone has researched and whether there's any reporting going on. It is just basically, we've learned that you can monetize content. And so journalists are now having to compete with content creators and influencers more than they ever had to before. So again, bringing this back to brand, who am I and how do I stand apart? And the way I always say that you do that is through the insights of what you're looking at. And so you use SEO to inform your decisions on stories. You look at it and you say, well, where is the audience? And we need to meet them where they are. So you can find out things of that nature. But then you have to use the angles of your brand voice to decide how you want to cover that. So again, as you follow a recipe, as we all know, it can tell you the exact right mixture of flour and water and heavy cream and whatever, and you can make a biscuit. But then as you're on the way there, you might find yourself with wet dough. So there is always a little bit of an art to what you're doing and on the fly adjusting to make that make sense for you. Your audience comes to you possibly because you are very good at being first, and possibly because you're talking about things that they're already talking about with others, but they're coming to you for a specific reason. That's because they want to know what you think. They want to know who you are and the team that you put together or the voice that you have developed as an individual, that you are actually weighing in on this. And where we are today is a place of such incredible hot takeness that everyone's just showing you that they are in the conversation. But if the conversation is not contextual and you're not growing that conversation, or at least enlightening your audience with more information that they can carry forward as they continue to have the conversation on or off your platform, you want to be that source. And again, when I brought up Thrillist, another reason that I think Thrillist was brilliant for what it is, and for what it was specifically, is that Thrillist didn't need you to give Thrillist all of this credit. What their goal was and their key was, if the people who use Thrillist, if we're good enough, they'll use us and keep coming back. So it's not about us so much, it's about the value that we give them. So you want to always think that way, because that's what works. I wanted to mention, just in the sense of, providing those perspectives. And again, SEO is the brilliant gold of nerdy stuff that we need. But then when you're looking at your byline and your presence in media, you have to remember that if you're going to say things that are out there, for me personally, I try to find places where someone else who's probably covering the same thing didn't think that same way. So it's that dogged journalism that still rings true to this day. But it also rings true that when you look at a story on social, and again, I know we're going to cover social next, but social is very much involved with SEO today. And so when I look at it for a brand, and brands that I've been involved with include Butter ATL, where I was the editor-in-chief, we look at stories and, there's a story that's trending today and has trended for the past few weeks, and that is Jonathan Majors, the actor who finds himself in a bit of a legal conundrum over allegations of abuse. And he's a legitimate Hollywood star who the Marvel universe has made a major investment in making him part of their cinematic, ecosphere. And that story has changed dramatically day over day, where in the court of public opinion, and he's in court right now, but in the court of public opinion, he's been guilty and not guilty and guilty and not guilty, with every little bit of evidence is coming out. That makes it pretty hard to cover if you want to cover that from today's current perspectives of, what he's done and he's wrong and all the hot takes. If you wanted to service that story to an audience and you're looking and you're seeing that there's the interest on SEO and search, but you're also seeing the interest on social, my advice to folks is look at that story and say there's the ability to give your audience a story about Jonathan Majors and just continuously updating them with, here's where the crowd is today, here's where the crowd is today, here's where things are shifting, here's what's going on. And you're basically just servicing them with news updates. If you wanted to do more than that, and if there's more analysis going on, it really is going to take time. And that gets me to what I'm thinking, that in terms of the strategies today, and what you want to do is look at news as if we're possibly going back to the time of magazine over, hot new BuzzFeed style journalism. And again, look at where BuzzFeed is today, not where it was very long ago. And that was sort of the huge elephant in the room on SEO content. They're the ones who made it to where we see what's trending, we're putting it out there. They were just growing and growing and growing, and now they're in a little bit of a conundrum because it is so competitive. Whereas if you're listening to someone who's actually looking at courtroom documents, who is following the trends on social media, who is watching the interest over time, who is gathering all that information and can apply reasonable context, that's where you're going to continue to get in brand, because they're not going to you for something they can find anywhere else. So there's always a bit of that you want to be careful about. Another thing that's happening right now, SEO wise, if you were to go to Google Trends, Rudolph Giuliani, he's been trending for a while, but today and since yesterday, it's spiking. And, in the US, it's not maybe the top topic in the world. There's many other things going on, as we know, but he's definitely going to be trending in Georgia. Why? Because there's a case going on right now to where they're having to decide whether or not he's going to have to pay the electors who he disparaged and how much that's going to be. So in my job in the AJC, they're covering that very extensively because we're seeing organic search and interest there. And we know that that's a Georgia story. And so while Giuliani may just seem like, the former president's lawyer and someone who worked in the White House and obviously is affiliated with former President Trump's politics, he's trending here for a reason. So what is the brand of the AJC doing? They're making sure they're all over that story with their in-depth team and their reporting and their analysis and going to the courtroom and bringing back those stories. So there are ways that you can look at that. Now, again, if you look at trends, and I was looking at it earlier, I think Giuliani, in the sense of when you break it down regionally by state, Georgia is the 15th, hottest state where he's trending right now. That's going to change over time today. So some of this is looking at it and making predictive analysis and saying, we need to go ahead and lean in here because we know when folks get into this, this leads to a bigger and broader story. This is in the whole Trump, multiverse of stories that are going in. We're going into a political year. What might this mean for Rudolph Giuliani's credibility and his continued presence as someone who could be called upon as a surrogate to the campaign? So those are ways that you can look at SEO and do things, but you have to think locally. And you have to think, again, the AJC, politics is a major place of their focus. So these are ways you want to be thinking about it. And as for the future of these things, as I said, I think we're going to be moving towards, and this is a theory, I think we're moving more towards the more in-depth coverage and the longer idea of things. So as you're looking at SEO and as you're thinking about these things, a phrase that we used at Butter all the time was, we make content at the speed of culture. But you can't do that well without considering the insight of what you're actually doing. So while we're putting speed at a premium, what is the insight of the story that everyone is talking about? What is our insight? What is our take on this place, this thing, this event that's happening? Where do we find the interesting tidbit and then build something around that? So keep that in mind. And again, I know we were saying this earlier, but while SEO is critically important, one of the things that you were saying, Amanda, your team is, a little bit frightened about is, again, you're going to go to Google more and more, and you're going to see that Google is not going to be including as much of those search results because they've in-house made all of those things the same way that they have sort of taken away the ad market and caused a lot of publishers a lot of struggles in the way in which it's much harder for those local publications and even the national publications to do a lot in terms of the sales and the ways that all these places run and generate revenue. They're going to do that with SEO. So you're going to go there and they're going to say, you can trust us because we have an amalgamation and this combined energy force of all of this great information, and you trust Google, you trusted us all this time. Well, why would you go anywhere? You're not even going to number 1 through 6. You're staying right in that box at the top of your screen. So remember that. And again, it's nothing to be afraid of, it's to be aware of it. But that to me means that it's going to be way more important that as you're thinking about this and, SEO, it's like, don't let it take away your voice. Make sure that you're incorporating brand voice and consider, I would say, taking your time before just giving your take, if that makes sense. So I'm going to turn it back over because there is more that I'd love to say about the social aspect of it, but I did want to stop and ask if there were any questions.
Mike, thanks a lot for that. And I guess, before jumping into Amanda, any quick questions? Trevor's got something in chat, more of an observation, as much that BuzzFeed and VC-backed media, the scale era seems to be over. And AI seems like it'll only intensify that.
That's right. That's right. I mean, it's and then it's going to become, listen, there's certainly something to be said for, just the prolific nature of just feeding the beast, more and more stories, more and more. So if that's what you want to do, and if that is your brand, certainly that's going to be a competitive field. And as AI continues to go, and as AI maybe or maybe does not replace traditional journalists, and you have, bots writing the news and whatnot, right, then you have to think about it. How efficient can you be against something that does not have to sleep, does not need to take a lunch break? It's gonna continue to come at you all day long. So even in that case, as AI continues to dominate in all the SEO, you're still going to need to slow down. And, one of the things that I'll just go ahead and say, because we'll maybe talk about it later, but I like to look at the micro influencer strategy of things. As we looked at the largest influencers all over the place, you can be a micro influencer without even being an influencer, just a type of journalist that is looking at your base and having those 1,000 true fans, as we hear about all the time, and really honing in on your community and making sure that those people are with you. Because if you have them, it's not so important that you're fighting bots and AI just to try to keep up with the pace. We're not going to be able to do it if it really does become a case where AI is writing a lot more of the news. It's just going to be humanly impossible.
Yeah, like you say, especially when I see in our audience here, someone like Dwayne out of Statesboro and his unique audience and product there. Just, know your community, hone in on that and go with it. Mike, that's awesome. Amanda, 11:43, go on, take us into social.
Absolutely. So I think in Mike and I can tag team here, like the big takeaway, and I 100% agree with everything that Mike Jordan just said, just so you know, like I would, woohoo, you know, we are like a school of fish, right? Where everyone jumps to the same thing. And that is particularly because of what's happening with AI in the digital space. It's not going to work anymore. You know, the care, the process, the depth, the connection with community, that's what's going to separate us. I think we're seeing the exact same thing play out with social. So referral traffic, which used to be kind of the gold standard 5 years ago, it was like, get it on social and then they'll click through to your site, right? I mean, that is absolutely bottoming out from all social platforms. Everyone is staying on the social place. They're not clicking through. They weren't really even a lot to begin with. Honestly, that was a little bit of a mythos. And so because referral traffic has fallen off, one of the things that I would advocate for when it comes to really good content journalism and news and information and communities is building your own digital products, right? I think obviously we have given a lot to social media companies and platforms. They have de-emphasized news. They have changed their algorithms. They have not particularly been good to us, and that's okay. It's not their job to be good to us. Our job is to create digital products that do exactly what Mike just said, which is connect to that loyal 1,000 audience, right? So it's newsletters, it's apps, it's websites that are actually navigable and don't have 30,000 menus that people have to try to figure out what to do with. It's content that goes straight from you to them that you control, whether that's a podcast or something else. Those digital products, I think, is where we need to be spending most of our time. Social exists and it's good. But that's never something we can control. And it is always going to be something that takes more from us than it gives. And so I think the key for me when I am talking to the Georgia newsrooms that we partner with, and I send students who are digitally savvy into Georgia newsrooms every semester, we try to really think of the social platforms as having a unique identity, audience, and purpose, and that you should never be posting wholesale, throwing spaghetti against the wall, right, for everything. So when I look at you know, our social platforms, so we use Social News Desk as one of our tools, our managers. Every platform should look different, right? I mean, there's different content because these platforms are just different spaces. It's like, you know, wearing, you know, cut off shorts and a t-shirt to a black tie event. You just have to dress differently in some places. You share different content in some places. And I think I still see too many news organizations trying to put everything everywhere, or running social accounts for every platform, when in fact, all your people may just be on Instagram and that's it. And that's where you spend your time and you make your stories pop, you know? And I think that there's a kind of a notion of we want to go out there and grab everyone we can, but I just want to echo what Mike just said. You know, I think that is the old form, and it's not sustainable. So we need to figure out where our audience and community is and meet them in that place, and then do what we can to build unique digital products that have conversations. So the big way that I like to talk about social, it is not for content, it's not news delivery. Nobody gets their news really from social, right? Like they get news on social, but it's not how they get informed or really learn about their communities. Social is good for two things. One, it allows you to have conversations. So it's not the traditional linear, you know, I'm just giving it to you on TV or in the newspaper, right? It allows for conversation and dialogue. And so if you can make your social content about conversation, about dialogue, and about engagement, then you're using those platforms for what they're worth. But just spinning off your latest article, you know, in a link is really probably not the best, you know, use of that space. The other thing is what Mike is exactly talking about, is letting people know who you are. That's what social does well. You know, behind the scenes content across all platforms is the best performing right now, because people still don't understand how a green screen works or what happens in a newsroom or the kind of questions you ask when you go out and who you talk to. They want to see us as people. They want to build trust with us. And so using social as a tool for understanding who the news organization is and what they do and why is probably one of the most successful ways right now, building that brand connection. And then hopefully that turns into relationship, routine, subscriptions, right? Like, but it's a longer ROI than just a click through. So for my take, and I want to hear what Mike has to say, social platforms are not about mass communication. They're about niche focused conversations where we tell people who we are and they tell us what they think and want covered. It's that multi-directional feeling. And so I would love to see more news organizations just building out digital products that they own and control and make sense for their audience. Mike, what do you think?
You said it. I mean, I was having a conversation with someone that we want to hopefully hire at the AJC for Black Culture's social components, because we've not yet launched our franchise. So it's still in the works and coming. But I was talking to someone who said something that I just could not agree with more. And I've seen this for a while. And again, you don't put your stuff, it's not everywhere, everything everywhere all at once. I have seen, and it's so strange that people continue doing it, is Twitter is just not where you should be. Twitter is good for an individual journalist. Twitter is not good for journalism. It just does not do what people think it does. And this person who I was talking to, he was talking about, he's found the same things. And he said, I found myself not really wanting to do what I know works on Twitter. And that tends to be a level of snarkiness. So that's one of the things that people react to. They look for this voice that is almost, there's a sort of pessimism there. It can get nasty, as we know on Twitter. That's one of the major issues they're having now is, the curation and the moderation of various things that go on. So it can get pretty nasty there. Is that the best place for to be dropping in a news story? Because what happens if that does get shared a lot of times, it gets then picked up and co-opted by people who may have ulterior motives and then switch things around to fit their narrative. And the next thing you know, it stopped being about you and finding that scoop or that story many, many, many retweets ago. It is now about some fringe group, and they've said, even the lamestream media, next thing you know, it's all bad, and you've just got a lot of stuff going on there. So it's absolutely critical to focus on where you can. Instagram is great because Instagram has a lot of different ways in which you can use the platform. If you want to make stories, you can make stories. If you want to make a reel, you can make reel. If you want to use video, photography. If you want to use a third-party app and create a different format and template for the way that you want to post things. It gives you a very long amount of text that you can put in underneath a caption. Obviously, it's great for resharing. It's now, Meta is integrated a way for you to use Threads, the new Twitter, so to say. So think about which one you're using, why you're using it, and whether or not it actually works for the way that you're using it. But it makes no sense, especially when the resources that we have, and every newsroom is not going to have a dedicated social person for each thing that they want to do. So best practices and not wasting time on something that's just not going to work is important. But I love another thing Amanda said is that, again, it's a longer ROI. So you cannot look at it and say, well, how come our story hasn't gone viral? It's performing well. Well, it just takes a while. You're building a relationship. And another great thing about social as a place to use and measure is that it is, again, when digital media first started coming, and we don't see as many of the comment sections. A lot of places have abandoned comments on stories, but that's what your social strategy should engage. As long as you cultivated an audience that is respectful, you let them know that you want to keep a good conversation going. And it is going to continue to be, we do continue to need moderators just to keep those conversations, from going off the deep end. But quite literally, the benefit is we're no longer in the blog era where you would write a story and then you had this great thing of like all of these people coming in. There were journalists who got hired from being contributing sort of commenters with gold stars back when Gawker was like the hottest thing in the world. And of course, Gawker is gone now. And Jezebel just left us not too long ago. And they've been through many different acquisitions and M&As where that whole, universe of sites is no longer what it used to be. And it's sad because I love those places. And they went on to the New York Times and they've gone all over the place, the New Yorker, all those suite of Gawker writers. But some writers got hired just by being great commenters. And so that's no longer there, but you can use social media for that exact purpose. So I would always tell people to use it for that, because then it starts to act like an SEO of its own.
God, Mike, when you mentioned Jezebel and Gawker, I feel so old. Yeah. Hey, so
and
picking
the
up
irony of that, like they were the young people's thing when they popped
Yeah.
up. They were the countercultural, like punching up at the New York Times, and now we're like, Uncle Gawker, you know, and Auntie Jezebel. So I mean, but those were the pioneers of where we are today, and we're still seeing ripple effects of what those publications and media organizations did that we can still learn from, even if they're not around to reap the benefits of their innovations.
So that kind of leads into Julia's question from the current. Where are some sites? Are any media, I guess, even at your own spaces in Oglethorpe in Georgia and at the AJC? How are you fostering conversation? And especially Instagram is her particular interest. Dwayne's talking about newsletter engagement. He's up to 25,000 subscribers there. Where are places where good fostering conversation tools exist, and who are some sites that are doing some good things? Amanda's rubbing her chin. That means that she's going to come in with a great answer, man.
No, that was stalling.
We can follow up too, but
That's a fabulous question. I feel like I would need to spend some time thinking on. I don't know. I will say that I do think some local news organizations, when they have the manpower for it, can foster conversations better than anything else because they know the place, right? It's not as big and as sprawling. And we've been trying to do that with the Echo. We serve a county of 15,000 people. And so like, it's really easy to be like, yeah, I know that dude, right? And have that larger conversation about like, hey, go look at this. This is the place where you can get a Christmas tree. When they ask the question on Instagram. I think sometimes, with stories, it has to do with clickables, like, polling and answering questions and things like that. Substantive engagement is hard, right? Because people typically are not substantive on social, like they're not, having full out, philosophical conversations. I will say that we do a lot of behind the scenes stuff of telling our story and who we are. Particularly on Instagram, and that does exceptionally well with both of our news organizations. We have seen that as far as analytics go, that content is always higher than our news content. And so as a beta test news source in the Echo, that's what does well for us. But that's a great question. Mike, do you have anybody?
I actually, you said it. I mean, we are all figuring it out at the same time. I can tell you, at least from the AJC's perspective, that's where a lot of our, ideas of what we want to do as we are rebranding, as we are creating new franchises, as we are rebranding some of those smaller franchises with Politically Georgia and, bringing in a team of the existing talent we had, Greg Bluestein, Patricia Murphy, Tia Mitchell, and bringing on Bill Nygaard, formerly of GPB, right. And now he's with us and also through a WABE partnership. So again, we're thinking about that right now, and we're starting early, and we're not afraid to, to figure out what's not working and then use that as learnings and to apply what we have and try different things. So, I mean, the honest truth is, I think that there are probably a lot of places that are finding out in real time that they've over-indexed in trying to force engagement and conversation without having built up and taken the long road of that engagement. Look at when you think about how comparing, let's say, a musician, a recording artist to a publication in a way, we give those folks 2 years of artist development before we put them out. And it's an investment of resources to say, okay, let's find songwriters and let's get a stylist to figure out what they should look like and what looks natural on them. Let's get a choreographer to show them how to dance and for them to come up with some creativity. Let's go to different places. Let's let them try different music out. You can look at, business. Again, most businesses aren't profitable. You give 2 years or so just to say, we're giving you some time. So that's the same with news and engagement and everything. It is a long game. And so, people say, I'm here for a good time, not a long time. Well, you shouldn't be in journalism because, if you love it, then sure, it can be a good time when you really love it, but it's work. And it's work that you get the dopamine hit when someone says, hey, you had a great story the other day, or you get those retweets or that viral moment that you might have. But it's a long game. And so as we see those success stories, I would lean into believing that the people who are going to be successful are not at all going to be the overnight successes who just came out and did something, unless it's something to where you're just seeing the very predictable, they just had a string of great memes and they've turned that into a social presence. But again, how do you transition that over into subscriptions? And getting people to become an organic follower and someone who's actually reading your news product. it's not easy. And so we're all learning that at the same time. So, you know, I'm taking ideas as well, but I would just say it's something for us to all watch and for us to all be in collaboration and conversation with each other, and don't feel like we're stealing, because I think that the future of journalism hinges on us seeing if something works for someone. We're all going to need to pay attention to that and say, that's what the audience wants, but how does that make sense for me? And what can we do to make that make sense across the enterprise of journalism?
We are
And
just
one,
about, go ahead, Amanda.
I would say just a super quick anecdote building on everything that Mike just said. I have students that go into all of our Facebook groups for our county and watch the conversations there. And someone was asking about food resources, that they're running low on food. What are the food pantries? My student popped in as the Oglethorpe Echo, gave them a list of all the links that we had, and then a story we just published as a 2024 resource guide for food in the county. That kind of organic kind of conversation. Sometimes you've got to, it's not people commenting on our site, right? It's people having conversations out in the community that we're watching, and then we're saying, we've got this for you. And that to me is kind of where it happens. Go ahead, Todd.
Just thanking everyone for being here. But I got one last question, Mike, since we've met and been working on this project two times around to work on this. Can I get a personal ask to you about your branding? I mean, you're the only guy I know I don't know many who share one famous name, but you sharing two famous names. How have you evolved your branding, your presence to try and make space for Mike Jordan, knowing that there's a Michael and a Michael B? I've been wanting to ask you for a month and a half now.
Well, that's a really great question. I am 46 years old. When Michael Jeffrey Jordan, the basketball player, was a very self-admittedly terrible basketball player who could not make the junior varsity in his school, in middle school, I was being born. So I was not born and named for Michael Jordan, the basketball player. I hope not, unless my mom really had bad ideas of what I was going to accomplish in life. As I remember Michael Jordan becoming a thing when I was a kid, and I went from being the super nerd that was just weird and whose mom was clearly dressing him, and, a lot of rayon. I don't know if anybody remembers Parker Lewis Can't Lose. I'm really dating myself now, but it was a lot of rayon and a lot of really oversized, but very well creased pants. And then Michael Jordan became a thing. And then everyone's like, Mike, why don't you have some Jordans? Why don't you get some Jordans? MJ. And I'm like, oh, I'm cool now. No thanks to me actually being cool, thanks to his arrival. But my name is Michael B. Jordan. So as my journalism career started, that was my niche. It was Michael B. Jordan. I'll even show everyone, if you can see this. This is my card. And you see the Jordan logo with a briefcase, a tie, and there's a pen. That guy's holding it. And on the back of that card, it's probably in reverse, but it says Michael B. Jordan. That card outdates the career of the actor Michael B. Jordan. I've had that byline before he came along. And then all of a sudden, because I remember being like, who is this kid on The Wire on HBO who's got my name when I was watching the credits? His name was Wallace on the show, but his real name was Michael B. Jordan. And I was a little mad about that. The next thing I know, he was in the Rocky spinoff Creed, and he was very shiny and obviously an adherent to personal fitness in a way that I'm not. And I knew I'd better change my byline, because to this very conversation, when he became a thing, I started to look up my own stories to see if I could find them, and I was nowhere near page one. And if I did the quotation marks, Michael plus Jordan plus journalism, I was doing every SEO trick that I could use. I could not find my stories because Google was like, no, sir, no, young man, you are not Michael B. Jordan. Even if that's your name, you're not him. We'll put you way down here. And so it changed my byline to Mike Jordan just so that I would show up in Google search. So very good question, relevant to this conversation. Yep.
Well, I'm glad to finally get that question asked, because it's been on my mind for a while. So, hey, with that, Amanda, Mike, Lori, I didn't give a shout out to you earlier, but thanks so much for all the help to get this here. We got one dry run, and I'm glad we got this one in before the new year. Thanks for your help also too at Georgia News Collaborative. Stay with us. We got some cool things coming up over the next couple months. Excited to get them going, and have a great holidays, and talk to you all soon.